The bright lights of a bustling New York City studio illuminated the sleek set of The Chris Allen Show, one of the most watched talk shows in the country. The live audience buzzed with anticipation, their murmurs blending with the upbeat music that played as the cameras panned across the room. Chris Allen, the charismatic and sharp-tongued host, took his place on the stage. His polished suit and signature smirk radiated confidence. Known for his biting humor and hard-hitting questions, Chris was a polarizing figure, beloved by his fans and dreaded by his guests. Tonight's show was meant to be no different, a mix of entertainment and provocative commentary. Chris leaned into the camera with his trademark mischievous grin, ready to kick off another lively episode. "Good evening, folks," he began, his voice dripping with confidence. "We've got a very special guest tonight, someone you wouldn't expect to see on this stage, someone who rarely steps into the spotlight these days." The audience perked up, their curiosity piqued. Chris let the suspense hang in the air, his grin widening as he continued. "Let's just say this guest has been a part of one of the most talked-about political chapters in recent history. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Melania Trump." A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by a hesitant round of applause. The energy in the room shifted dramatically as all eyes turned to the entrance. From backstage, Melania Trump emerged, her elegant emerald green suit catching the light as she walked onto the stage with quiet confidence. Her posture was regal, her expression calm yet commanding. She nodded graciously to the audience as the camera zoomed in on her composed face. Some members of the crowd clapped enthusiastically, while others exchanged bewildered glances, unsure how to react. It wasn't every day that the former First Lady appeared on a platform like The Chris Allen Show, especially given Chris's reputation for being relentless with his guests. Chris, too, seemed momentarily thrown off, though he quickly masked it with his signature charm. Rising from his chair, he extended a hand to Melania. "Mrs. Trump," he said, his tone polite, yet laced with intrigue, "thank you for joining us tonight. I must admit, this is quite the surprise." Melania shook his hand, her movements deliberate and poised. "Thank you for having me," she replied, her accent soft but deliberate. The audience watched, captivated by her composure. As she took her seat across from Chris, the studio lights seemed to intensify, spotlighting the stark contrast between the two figures. Chris leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other, his eyes sparkling with curiosity and mischief. Melania, however, sat upright, her hands resting gracefully in her lap, exuding an air of quiet strength. The stage was set. The audience buzzed with anticipation, sensing that this would not be an ordinary interview. What they didn't know was that the evening would take a turn no one, least of all Chris, could have anticipated. The atmosphere in the studio was electric, every eye fixed on the unlikely pairing seated on the stage. Chris Allen, known for his sharp wit and no-holds-barred approach, leaned forward slightly, his polished smile masking the gears turning in his head. Melania Trump, seated opposite him, radiated calm, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Her demeanor was unshakable, her expression unreadable. It was a battle of contrasts, his calculated charm versus her quiet grace. Chris began with pleasantries, his voice smooth. "Melania, I think I speak for everyone when I say we didn't expect to see you here tonight. You've kept quite a low profile since leaving the White House. What's life been like for you since then?" Melania met his gaze steadily, her voice even. "Life has been peaceful," she said, her words measured. "I focus on my family, my initiatives, and helping children through my work." The audience nodded approvingly, but Chris wasn't about to let the conversation remain in safe territory. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, and allowed a hint of mischief to creep into his tone. "That's commendable," he said, his smile widening. "But let's not pretend everyone agrees with your approach. Many have criticized you for staying silent during key moments of your husband's presidency. Some say silence can be complicity. What do you say to that?" The room seemed to hold its breath. The audience, waiting for her to falter, leaned forward in their seats. Chris's question, while phrased politely, was clearly a calculated jab meant to unsettle her. The tension in the air was palpable, and the cameras captured every nuance of the moment. Melania, however, didn't flinch. She allowed the silence to linger for a beat before answering. "I believe actions speak louder than words," she said simply, her accent giving her words an added layer of deliberation. "It is easy to speak loudly and say what people want to hear. It is harder to take meaningful steps that create lasting change." Her response was calm but firm, her words resonating with a conviction that caught Chris off guard. The audience murmured softly, a mix of approval and curiosity rippling through the crowd. Even those skeptical of her couldn't deny the quiet power of her composure. Chris, ever the showman, quickly recovered. Interesting philosophy, he said, his tone laced with intrigue. But don't you think there are times when words are just as important as actions, especially in moments of national division? Melania tilted her head slightly, her expression as composed as ever. Words are important, she conceded, but words without action are empty. I focus on what I can do to help, not on what others expect me to say. There was a subtle shift in the room. For the first time, Chris seemed slightly unsettled. He had expected defensiveness or hesitation, but her calm responses were throwing him off his rhythm. The audience, too, seemed to be warming to her sincerity. The interview continued, the tension building as Chris prepared to push harder. But Melania's composed responses hinted at an inner strength that was just beginning to reveal itself. The storm was coming, but she wasn't going to be swept away. Chris adjusted his posture, leaning forward slightly as if readying himself for the next round. His polished grin remained, but there was an unmistakable sharpness in his eyes. The easygoing prelude was over. Now it was time to challenge his guest. The audience felt the shift, the tension thickening like the air before a thunderstorm. Melania, Chris began, his tone carrying an edge. You've mentioned actions speaking louder than words, but some would argue that silence in key moments can be just as damaging as empty words. During some of the most controversial periods of your husband's presidency, people looked to you for guidance, for your voice, and they didn't hear it. Don't you think that silence can sometimes be complicit? A collective murmur rippled through the audience. Some exchanged knowing glances, others shifted in their seats, bracing for what was to come. Chris's question hung in the air, daring her to stumble. Melania remained composed, her hands resting gently on her lap. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of the question settle before responding. I understand why some people feel that way, she said, her tone even and measured. But silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is reflection, focus, and choosing to act in ways that may not be visible to the public. Her answer, while calm, carried an underlying firmness that caught Chris off guard. He raised an eyebrow, leaning back slightly as if recalibrating his approach. That's an interesting perspective, he said, his voice tinged with skepticism. But surely you can see how the public, how even your supporters, might interpret that silence as a lack of concern or involvement. Melania tilted her head, her expression softening but her voice unwavering. I cannot control how others interpret my actions, she replied. What I can control is my intent and the impact of the work I do. My focus has always been on helping children, on promoting kindness, and on advocating for mental health. These are not things that require a microphone. They require action. The audience stirred, some nodding in quiet agreement, others still unsure of how to react. Chris, however, wasn't ready to relent. He tapped his pen lightly against the armrest, his signature smirk returning. That's fair, he said, but surely there were moments, times of division, of national crisis, when people needed more than action behind the scenes. They needed reassurance, leadership. Don't you think those moments called for a stronger voice? The question landed heavily, and the room grew quieter still. Melania's expression didn't falter, but her gaze sharpened, her presence commanding even in stillness. Leadership is not about volume, she said finally, her voice calm yet resolute. It is about consistency, integrity, and staying true to one's values, even when it is unpopular. I choose to lead by example, not by spectacle. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, accompanied by scattered applause. Chris's confident demeanor flickered momentarily, his smirk faltering as her words resonated. The room's energy had shifted again. What began as a pointed interrogation was becoming a battle of wills, and though Chris pushed harder, Melania's composed responses continued to deflect his attempts to corner her. The audience, once skeptical, now leaned in, captivated by the quiet power she exuded. Chris sat back, the tension visibly rising. He was running out of easy ways to rattle her, but he wasn't finished yet. The real storm was about to begin. Chris's smirk lingered for a moment as he shuffled the cards on his desk, preparing to strike with his next question. The audience was captivated, hanging on every word and every pause. They could sense that the interview was approaching a boiling point, the tension in the room almost unbearable. Chris leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly to a calculated tone, designed to sound both curious and provocative. Melania, he began, you've spoken about your values, your initiatives, and your belief in actions over words. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, your marriage to Donald Trump. Many have speculated about your silence being more than a political strategy. Some say it's personal, that you stayed silent to protect your husband, even when his actions or words created division. How do you reconcile your personal loyalty with the public's need for leadership? The audience gasped collectively, a murmur rippling through the crowd like an electric current. Chris's question wasn't just bold, it was deeply personal. He had crossed an invisible line, venturing into territory that many deemed too sensitive, even for someone as sharp as him. All eyes were on Melania, waiting to see if she would falter. For a moment, Melania didn't respond. Her hands remained clasped in her lap, her posture unyielding. The silence stretched, amplifying the weight of the question. The audience leaned forward, the air thick with anticipation. Chris's confident expression began to falter slightly, his eyes narrowing as he tried to read her reaction. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm yet piercing. "Regret is for those who do not take responsibility for their choices," she said, each word deliberate and unwavering. "I know who I married. I know the life I chose. And I stand by it, not because it is easy, but because it is mine." The room fell silent for a beat, then erupted into applause. Some audience members rose to their feet, clapping with admiration. Chris's smirk disappeared completely, replaced by a flicker of surprise. He hadn't expected her to confront the question with such conviction, and the audience's reaction left him momentarily stunned. Melania continued, her voice gaining strength. "It is easy to sit on the outside and judge someone's life," she said, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "But unless you have lived it, you cannot understand the complexities, the challenges, or the decisions. My loyalty to my husband is not blind. It is built on mutual respect, shared values, and a commitment to our family. That is my truth." Chris attempted to interject, but Melania didn't allow it. "We live in a world where everyone has an opinion," she said, her tone resolute. "But opinions are not facts. I choose to focus on what I know to be true, not on the noise created by those who do not know me." The audience erupted into louder applause, some cheering. Chris sat back in his chair, visibly humbled. For the first time in his career, he seemed unsure of how to regain control of the conversation. The balance of power on the stage had shifted. What started as a relentless interrogation had transformed into a moment of triumph for Melania. Her grace under fire had silenced her critics, leaving both the audience and her host in awe. But the night wasn't over, and Melania wasn't finished making her point. The applause echoed through the studio, lingering long after it had subsided. The shift in energy was palpable. What had begun as a typical grilling by Chris Allen had now turned into something far more compelling. Melania Trump, once seen as reserved and enigmatic, was steering the conversation with a quiet authority that no one had anticipated. Even Chris, known for his ability to control the narrative, appeared momentarily thrown off. Chris leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. His confident smirk had dimmed, replaced by a pensive expression. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain his composure. "Well, Melania," he began, his tone carefully measured, "you certainly know how to handle tough questions. But let's address something broader. Your husband's presidency was one of the most polarizing in modern history. Many believe the media, including shows like mine, played a role in that division. Would you say that's a fair assessment?" Melania tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but thoughtful. She took a moment before responding, her voice steady. "Division has always existed," she began. "It is not created by one person, one presidency, or one media outlet. It is a reflection of deeper issues in society, issues that we all must take responsibility for. Blaming one source is easy, but it does not solve the problem." The audience murmured softly, her words striking a chord. Chris, sensing an opportunity, leaned forward. "But surely you can acknowledge," he said, "that the media is a powerful force. Shows like mine are built on holding people accountable. Don't you think it's our responsibility to challenge leaders and demand answers?" Melania's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, accountability is important," she replied, "but so is balance. When the focus is only on division, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The media has a responsibility not just to question, but to unite, to offer solutions, and to promote understanding. Words are powerful. They can either build bridges or tear them down." The room fell silent, the audience hanging on her every word. Chris's usual quick wit seemed to falter as he absorbed her response. He opened his mouth to speak, but Melania continued, her tone growing more resolute. "I do not dismiss the role of the media," she said, "but I ask, how often do we stop to question the impact of the stories we tell? Do we highlight what brings people together, or do we focus only on what divides them? Unity requires effort from everyone, not just leaders or public figures, but also those who shape the narratives we consume." A wave of applause broke out, surprising even Chris. He shifted in his seat, visibly grappling with her words. This was not the outcome he had anticipated. Melania's quiet yet firm challenge had flipped the script, turning the spotlight back on him and the broader role of the media. Fair point, Chris conceded, his voice softer now. I suppose we all have a part to play in that. His admission, though brief, was a rare moment of humility on his part. The audience erupted again, some rising to their feet. Melania's ability to remain composed while redirecting the conversation to a larger, more meaningful issue had won over skeptics. For the first time, the balance of power wasn't just shifted, it was entirely in her favor. And though the interview continued, it was clear who was now in control. The interview drew to a close, but the energy in the studio was far from fading. As the credits rolled and the cameras cut to commercial, the live audience erupted into a final round of applause. Melania Trump, composed as ever, stood gracefully, offering a polite nod of gratitude. Chris Allen rose too, his earlier bravado replaced by a quieter, more reflective demeanor. The air was charged not with tension but with the undeniable impact of what had just unfolded. Backstage, the producers scrambled to discuss what they'd just witnessed. Some typed furiously on their laptops, already preparing clips for social media, while others whispered to one another in awe. She flipped the narrative, one muttered. I don't think I've ever seen Chris that rattled. Meanwhile, Melania made her way through the maze of production staff, her presence commanding attention without her needing to say a word. Some crew members approached her cautiously, offering quiet compliments. You handled that with such grace, one assistant said, her voice tinged with admiration. Thank you for showing what dignity looks like. Melania smiled graciously but didn't linger. She thanked them softly and continued toward the exit. There was no need for theatrics. Her words had already spoken volumes. As she approached the backstage door, a voice called out behind her. Mrs. Trump! It was Chris. He caught up to her, his expression a mix of respect and humility. The confidence that usually radiated from him had dimmed, replaced by something more genuine. I just wanted to say, he began, pausing as if choosing his words carefully. I didn't expect you to handle that the way you did. Grace under fire. There's something to be said for that. Melania turned to face him, her expression calm but firm. Thank you, Chris, she replied. But I don't handle conversations, I speak the truth, and the truth does not need handling. Her words lingered in the air, and Chris gave a small nod of respect. Fair enough, he said, offering a faint smile. You've given me a lot to think about. Without waiting for a response, Melania exited the building. Outside, a crowd of reporters and photographers had already gathered, their cameras flashing like strobe lights in the night. Questions flew from every direction. Melania, do you think Chris went too far? Were you prepared for those questions? What message do you want people to take from tonight? She paused briefly, her posture as steady as ever, and faced the crowd. Her response was succinct but powerful. I said what needed to be said, nothing more. With that, she stepped into her waiting car, leaving the crowd buzzing in her wake. By the time she arrived home, clips of the interview had already gone viral. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #Melania Speaks and #Grace Under Fire. The nation was captivated, divided between those who praised her composure and those who criticized her measured responses. Yet amid the chaos of debate, one truth was clear. Melania Trump had done what few could. She turned a relentless interrogation into a moment of grace and strength, redefining herself in the eyes of millions. The next morning, the fallout from the interview dominated headlines across the country. Clips of Melania's poised responses and her sharp, understated rebuttals to Chris Allen's relentless questions were trending across every major social media platform. The hashtags #Melania Speaks, #Grace Under Fire, and #Chris vs. Melania were at the top of the charts, sparking conversations across the political and social spectrum. News anchors dissected every moment of the interview, from Melania's calm responses to Chris's faltering attempts to regain control of the narrative. On one network, a panel debated whether Chris had overstepped boundaries in his line of questioning. He went too far when he made it personal, one commentator argued. But Melania's composure turned it into a masterclass in handling pressure. On another channel, a different panel praised her approach. She didn't just defend herself, she elevated the conversation to a larger issue about media accountability and unity. Social media platforms were ablaze with commentary from everyday viewers. Some praised her resilience and ability to deflect hostility with grace. Say what you want about Melania, but that interview was a lesson in staying true to yourself. Chris Allen met his match. She didn't even raise her voice, and he crumbled. Others criticized her responses as vague or evasive. She avoided the tough questions, Composure doesn't equal answers. She's mastered the art of deflection, but the public deserves more transparency. Amid the divided opinions, one thing was undeniable. Melania Trump had captivated the nation. The interview became a focal point for discussions about the role of media, the nature of leadership, and the importance of composure in the face of adversity. Chris Allen addressed the interview on his show the following evening. Sitting behind his desk, his usual air of confidence was tinged with humility. "Last night's interview was unexpected," he began, his tone softer than usual. "Whether you agree with her or not, Melania Trump brought a level of dignity to the conversation that's rare in this day and age. I didn't anticipate that, and I think we can all learn something from it." His admission sparked another wave of discussion. For many, the interview wasn't just about Melania or Chris. It was about the broader lesson of handling adversity with dignity and standing firm in one's truth. Meanwhile, Melania remained silent. She issued no further statements, letting her words from the interview speak for themselves. This deliberate silence only heightened her impact, proving that sometimes restraint can make the loudest statement. This story reminds us of the power of composure and the strength of staying true to your values, even under intense scrutiny. In a world filled with division and noise, Melania Trump's poise under pressure stands as a powerful example of grace and resilience. What do you think? Can dignity and restraint be more effective than loud confrontation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring and thought-provoking stories. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind,